President's attitude to Canada is they are an important ally. They're an important trading partner, especially for folks in this region of our country. But Canada has taken advantage of the United States of America for far too long. We're going to get to a point where Canada treats our workers fairly, we treat their workers fairly, and they're going to be a true ally and a true friend, not somebody who's taken advantage of us, which is what they've done for most of my life.
Washington is spiraling, and the signs are everywhere. J.D. Vance stands before cameras accusing Ottawa of decades of exploitation. Donald Trump keeps insisting America does not need Canada. Pete Hegseth joins the chorus with increasingly hostile language. But here is what nobody in the American media wants to admit. This aggressive rhetoric is not coming from a position of dominance. It is coming from desperation. Because when you examine what is actually happening beneath the surface, when you look past the theatrical declarations and study the underlying realities, a completely different picture emerges. The United States is losing leverage, and Mark Carney knows it. For months, the pattern has been unmistakable. Every time Canada makes a strategic move, Washington's reaction intensifies. Trade talks with China, aggressive pushback, energy partnerships with Europe, public condemnation, Arctic sovereignty investments, threats about NATO commitments. This is not coincidence. This is a tell. And people who have spent careers navigating high-stakes negotiations recognize exactly what it means. When officials react most forcefully to specific actions, they are revealing which pressure points actually matter. The louder the reaction, the more significant the threat. Washington is not attacking Canada because Canada is weak. Washington is attacking Canada because Canada is winning. Start with the fundamental assumption that shaped American strategy from the beginning. The United States believed it held all the cards. Canada's economy depends heavily on access to American markets. Roughly 75% of Canadian exports flow south across the border. Therefore, conventional wisdom suggested Canada would ultimately capitulate to whatever terms Washington demanded. Apply enough tariff pressure, create enough economic uncertainty, and Canadian leadership would rush to negotiate a deal favorable to American interests. That was the playbook. Straightforward, proven. Except it did not work, because Mark Carney refused to follow the script. Instead of panicking when tariffs escalated, Canada held position. Instead of accepting a rushed agreement to relieve immediate pressure, Carney insisted on maintaining standards. Instead of limiting options to bilateral negotiations with Washington, Canada systematically expanded its global partnerships. These were not desperate reactions. These were calculated strategic moves designed to fundamentally alter the negotiating dynamic, and they succeeded. Because leverage in trade negotiations is not determined solely by market size. Leverage comes from alternatives, from the credible ability to absorb short-term pain, from demonstrating you are genuinely prepared to walk away from bad deals. Carney strengthened all three simultaneously. The energy dimension exposes just how badly Washington miscalculated. The United States imports more crude oil from Canada than from every other country on Earth combined. Read that again, combined. At a moment when global energy markets face unprecedented disruption, when the Strait of Hormuz sits effectively closed, when 20% of global oil supply has been removed from circulation, when prices spike and transportation costs surge, Canada provides something irreplaceable: stable, reliable, geographically proximate energy. No tankers crossing hostile waters, no supply chains vulnerable to geopolitical shocks, just pipelines flowing steadily from a politically stable neighbor. That is not dependence on America's part. That is critical strategic vulnerability disguised as partnership. Canadian negotiators recognize this reality. They are actively exploring ways to leverage the energy relationship given rising uncertainty around global access and pricing. Translation: Canada now understands it holds the ultimate trump card in any trade confrontation. Because the Trump administration escalated tensions with Iran, a deliberate policy choice that triggered the current energy crisis, and that choice created domestic political pressure Washington never anticipated. Oil prices climbing, gas prices at pumps increasing, voters growing restless. The strategy meant to project strength abroad generated vulnerability at home. And timing matters enormously here, because these economic pressures are building precisely as USMCA review negotiations approach. the worst possible moment for Washington to be negotiating from weakness. But energy is merely the most obvious leverage point. Canada controls access to critical minerals essential for modern technology and defense manufacturing. Canadian investment in the American economy reaches into the trillions of dollars. Canada can redirect trade toward Europe, Asia, and Latin America, partnerships Carney has been systematically cultivating for exactly this scenario. Taken together, these factors create a negotiating position far stronger than Washington expected. Canada is not dependent anymore. Canada is positioned. This explains why the rhetoric from US officials has become so aggressive and repetitive. When Trump repeatedly claims America does not need Canada, he is not stating objective fact. He is attempting to control narrative. When Vance accuses Canada of exploitation for most of my life, he is not presenting evidence-based analysis. He is projecting frustration that their pressure campaign failed. When these statements get delivered publicly, forcefully, and with increasing frequency, experienced negotiators recognize the pattern. This is what desperation looks like, wrapped in tough guy language. Consider the actual sequence of events. Washington applied maximum tariff pressure, expecting Canada to crack. Canada did not. Washington threatened to abandon USMCA entirely, suggesting bilateral deals would replace the trilateral framework. Canada responded by deepening partnerships beyond North America. Washington escalated hostile rhetoric. Canada announced massive Arctic investments, demonstrating it would defend sovereignty independently. At every stage, the expected Canadian capitulation never materialized, and at every stage, American frustration became more visible. Here's what shifted the entire dynamic fundamentally. Carney never accepted the premise that Canada's only option was negotiating better terms within the existing power structure. Instead, he rebuilt the structure itself. By demonstrating genuine willingness to diversify trade relationships, he introduced uncertainty into Washington's assumptions. Because if Canada can actually pivot toward alternative partners, if Asian markets hungry for stable energy find Canadian supply attractive, if European buyers choose Canadian critical minerals, if investment flows redirect away from cross-border integration, then the cost of pressuring Canada increases exponentially, while effectiveness decreases proportionally. That changes everything. The geopolitical timing could not be worse for Washington. The Iran war they initiated created exactly the crisis environment where Canada's stability and resources become most valuable. Asian markets face severe energy shortages. European supply chains remain disrupted. Countries worldwide are actively seeking reliable long-term partners who will not use trade as a weapon. Canada fits that role perfectly. For the first time in generations, Canada is not just reacting to global demand, Canada is actively shaping it. And countries with options in high-demand markets hold power over countries that need what they are selling. This brings us back to why J.D. Vance's statement matters so profoundly. Not because of what he said. Accusations of Canadian exploitation are objectively absurd, but because of why he said it when he said it. These comments came after strategic failures, after tariffs did not force compliance, after threats did not generate concessions, after pressure campaigns failed to achieve objectives. The statement reveals frustration, not strength. Because if Canada truly lacked leverage, there would be no need for repeated public attacks. There would be no need to reinforce the narrative constantly. The mere fact that American officials keep insisting they hold all the cards suggests they are increasingly uncertain whether that is actually true. What we are witnessing is not just another trade dispute between neighbors. It is a fundamental shift in perceived power dynamics. For decades, the assumption held that Washington dictated terms of its relationship with Ottawa. But that assumption is being tested in real time because leverage evolves, circumstances change. And in this specific moment, with global energy markets in chaos, with critical mineral demand surging, with countries seeking stable partners, Canada holds significantly more negotiating power than many expected. The aggressive statements coming from Washington may sound dominant, but beneath that tough exterior lies something else entirely, growing realization that the balance is no longer one-sided. Mark Carney did not beat the United States through confrontation. He did not escalate tensions or match hostile rhetoric. He did something far more effective. He quietly constructed alternatives that made American pressure irrelevant. He built relationships that gave Canada genuine options. He positioned the country so it could absorb short-term economic pain if necessary. And he made it credible that Canada would walk away from bad deals. That is not weakness responding to strength. That is strategic repositioning that fundamentally alters who needs whom more. And right now, despite all the bluster from Washington, the United States needs Canada far more than it wants to admit. The attacks from Trump, Vance, and other officials are not signs they are winning. They are signs they know they are losing, and they are frustrated as hell about it.